What should we do whilst we're waiting for the neighbours to stop making noise, James?
I don't know.
How about you tell everybody a joke?
Okay. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Europe.
You're a poo.
No, you're a poo.
Oh, man!
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
So hello everyone and welcome to
Dad and me love history.
I'm Dad.
And I'm James Letters.
And today we're looking at why does a country go to war against itself? That's called a civil war. We'll focus on one civil war in particular. I wonder if people know which war killed more people than any other war in American history.
The American Civil War.
Yep, it took place more than 150 years ago, long before World War II and World War I. Why did the US go to war against itself? The North didn't have slavery. It was against the law in the North, but it was legal, it was allowed in the South. So the Southern states wanted slavery, but the North told the South they couldn't have slaves. Then in 1861, a man became president who was known to be strongly against slavery. His name was Abraham Lincoln. So James, here's a map of the United States. And the states which are in red or pink, they're the Confederate states in the South. And they wanted to keep slaves, to keep slavery. The blue states in the North, and out here on the West Coast, they wanted to get rid of slavery.
TPP, that time, Abraham Lincoln was the tallest president ever. He was 193 centimeters tall, and he liked to keep paper and notebooks on his head under his top hat.
It's funny what he would keep under his top hat. Pieces of paper and notebooks. As soon as Abraham Lincoln was elected, 7 southern states left the United States, which was known as the Union, and they set up their own new country called the Confederate States of America. So 7 states from the South started a new country, but the North didn't like that. About 9 million people lived in the southern states back then, and more than 3 million of those 9 million were slaves. The strange thing was, most farmers in the South did not own slaves. Only the richest farmers did. Sadly, when rich people want something, they often have the power to get other people to fight for what they want. But it wasn't as simple as saying that everybody fought because of slavery. Some people in the South went to war simply because they didn't like the North bossing around the South. They wanted to be able to decide things for themselves in their home area, and that feeling is still strong across many parts of the United States. The idea that local people can do a better job of deciding what's best for their area, rather than the government that's hundreds or thousands of miles away. But back to slavery. Slave workers were cheaper than paying ordinary workers. It was cheaper to pay for a person who'd been kidnapped from Africa. The slaves were chained up on a ship, taken to America and then sold. They were not treated like humans. Their basic human rights were taken away. We joke in our house that James thinks he's got a certain human right to have
ice cream.
But these were real human rights that were taken away, like the right to be free. The slaves were not paid, and they were only given basic food to survive, and they had to live in flimsy shacks, huts. So they didn't cost the slave owners anything like so much as ordinary workers, who would have to be paid every day. The slave trade was started by Europeans travelling to Africa to capture slaves and sell them, not only in the United States but across Central and South America too. So if you know people today from anywhere in North or South or Central America who've got darker skin, then their great-great and maybe a couple more greats-grandparents were probably slaves.
Fun fact, war began on the exact day Dad was born, April 12, 1861.
My birthday is April 12th, but I wasn't born in 1861. I was born in 1883. But yeah, war began on April 12th, 1861, in the state of South Carolina, when the Confederate States Army, that's the South, remember, when they attacked Fort Sumter, which had the United States Army in it, and their boss of the United States Army was President Lincoln in the North. South Carolina was one of the 7 states that had announced that they were a new country, so they wanted to force the United States Army out.
Fact time. In the first few battles of the war, people on both sides didn't have uniforms, so during the battle you didn't know who was on your side.
Yes, they'd not expected to be fighting against themselves, so they hadn't picked colours nor got any uniforms made. Later, the North, who were called the Union, later they would wear dark blue, and the South, called the Confederates, wore grey. And wounded people were often left on the battlefield for days afterwards, and of course many of them died there. Some families had some people fighting on one side and other members of the family fighting on the other side.
Fact time. John Paddington was a general in the army for the north side, but his brother George was a general on the south side.
That's right, 2 brothers, 2 generals, one on the side of the north, one on the south. How crazy is that? Soon the North would have over 2 million soldiers, whereas the South had 1 million.
Fact time. Many in the South had already had a lot of practice shooting guns because they did lots of hunting there.
That's right, whereas in the North most men worked in factories and didn't go hunting. The first big battle of the American Civil War was the Battle of Bull Run in July 1861, and the South won. There were more battles, but 1863 was a key year. That year began with President Lincoln making an important announcement on January 1st, and it was called the Emancipation Proclamation, which means the Freedom Announcement. Lincoln proclaimed or announced that slaves must be emancipated, set free, and he said they could join the North's Union Army. Smart move. He got 200,000 African American men to join his army. So 200,000 black African men to join his army. Obviously that made his army bigger. By now the North was winning more battles. The 1863 Battle of Gettysburg was a big victory for them, and they advanced down into the South. After the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln made a famous speech called the Gettysburg Address. Here, he said that after the Civil War, there would be more freedom for everyone and more equality for people. So he said things would be fairer, if the North won, that is. He said that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom. Anyway, the war continued until 1865, when on April 9th, almost 4 years after the war began, on April 12th, 1861, the South's General Robert E. Lee surrendered to the North, and the war was over.
Fact time. 623,000 Americans had died, more than would be killed in World War I and World War II added together.
Yeah, it's terrible. Americans killing Americans in the American Civil War, that killed more people than all the enemies of World War I and World War II. President Lincoln wanted not to be mean to the South, but to be kind and help rebuild and become an equal part of the United States again. But 5 days after the South surrendered, Lincoln went to see a play at a theatre in Washington, D.C. That morning, he told his bodyguard that he had a dream the night before that he would be assassinated, that he would be killed. At the theatre that night, and it was Good Friday 1865, a spy for the Confederate Army of the South, a spy called John Wilkes Booth, shot Lincoln in the head. And this was after the surrender, remember. The war was supposed to be over. John Wilkes Booth escaped from the theatre, but he was later found about 70 miles away. He refused to surrender, so he was shot dead. Lincoln lived on for 9 more hours and then died. So sadly, the great President Abraham Lincoln, who had ended slavery and won the Civil War, was killed just days after the war finished.
We love history. We love history, baby. We love history. What kind of dive are soldiers best at? Cannonball. What did the flag of the Northern United States say to the flag of the South?
Nothing. It waved.
Where did General Lee put his armies?
I don't know. Where did General Lee put his armies?
In his sleeves. Get it? In his sleeves.
Ah. So, James, any ideas why do countries go to war against themselves? It's a difficult question, right?
Because the other side wants something else and the other side wants something else.
Yeah, I think that's right. Our country's divided with like two big groups that want different things. And one group of people want to force their ideas on another. It's often the way it goes. Other civil wars worked like that. There was a civil war in England about 300 years ago, before the American Civil War. And that was mainly about the power of the king and whether he had too much power, whether Parliament should have the power, and even whether they needed a king at all. So there was people fighting to get rid of the king. That's what happened in England. Then there's the Chinese Civil War from the 1940s. And there you had the communists against the nationalists, and they had different ideas, different political ideas about how to run the country and how things should be done. And they fought about it, and many millions of people were killed. Whatever the reasons, and they do often seem quite similar, like you said, people wanting different things and having an argument about it. Whatever the reason, it always causes lots of bloodshed and costs the country lives, as well as destroying a lot of the country in the battles. I think it's probably best not to have a civil war. What do you think, James?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, thanks for listening. That's everything for this week from
Dad and me love history. Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
Right, we'll take our headphones off, James.
Lakataka, lukataka, bukakaka, kuka, lukataka, lukataka. Cannonball! That's in a really dive.
The cannonball? You put yourself up into a ball?
That is not a dive.
Wave a flag? Oh, gosh, in a grumpy mood now. None of these are going to work. I have no jokes in there. You don't like any of those, do you?
Nope.
That's all I could find. Do beep beep. Fact time. Ooh yeah.
Blah blah boom.